let's get started with this panel, From Crisis to Peace, the Role of Cultural Heritage. On this panel, I am very pleased to introduce Alexandra Xanthaki, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Cultural Rights, Elisabeth Decret-Warner, founder and former president of Geneva Call and associate researcher at the Geneva Center for Security Policy and a member of the Aleph International Council. His Excellency Abdul Karim Hashim Mostafa, the permanent representative of the Republic of Iraq to the United Nations and also member of the Aleph International Council. Corinne Momal-Vagnan, Executive Director of the Kofi Annan Foundation. Luis Montreal, General Manager of the Aga Khan Trust for Culture. And our beloved Munir Bushnaki, who is the ad interim chair of the Aleph Scientific Committee. Thank you all.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. This panel is a panel which is continuing this very, very interesting series that we have had since yesterday with Alif and with a very rich international participation. I am honored to have the panel. It was introduced, and as we don't have a lot of time, but we have very important questions, I would like to say from the beginning that each panelist will have between 2 to 3 minutes for each question, and then we will give the floor also to the assembly, to the presence in this room. So let's start immediately about the theme of this panel, which is From Crisis to Peace, the Role of Cultural Heritage. The first question that we would like to address to the panelists is the following. Do you consider the UNESCO normative texts concerning the protection of cultural heritage, in case of armed conflicts, an example of best practices? I mean, the Hague Convention of 1954 and its second protocol of 1999. The role of cultural heritage can be considered as ambiguous, it can divide, or can be presented as such, as well as unite, as yesterday Mrs. Irina Bokova, our former Director General of UNESCO, with whom I had the pleasure also to work. How, in your experience, you consider it to be a lever for crisis exit processes and peace building? So we can start by any of our panelists. Maybe I saw that Mrs. Alessandra Xanthaki, special rapporteur of the United Nations in the field of cultural rights. You have the floor on this particular question. Please.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. I think that it is important that we have conventions, normative texts, protecting cultural heritage. I think that the UNESCO Convention is important because it sets a framework. When it was created in 1954, it was a pioneer in its field. But most importantly, for me, it creates specific states' obligations. And this is very important. Very often, states tell us about their initiatives as good practice, and they're very kind of embellishing, and they tell us how lovely their initiatives are. And we have to remind them that these are not aspirations. This is not good practice. These are minimum standards that they have signed, their obligations they have signed and ratified without their free will, with their free choice. They have decided that they're going to be bound by these state obligations. So I think that in this respect, the UNESCO instruments are very important. At the same time, I think that we have to see UNESCO instruments as part of a whole framework, of a whole system that incorporates other standards as well. So I'm going to be very frank with you. I am here to take the message of cultural rights. Cultural rights, as I said earlier, I was very surprised that cultural rights are not at the center of these discussions. So when we talk about the various conventions, when we talk about various guidances and handbooks and discussions, the right to protect one's cultural heritage and the right to protect one's cultural rights is essential in order to be able to effectively protect cultural heritage. So the protection of cultural heritage cannot take place without the protection of the right to have to enjoy cultural rights. And this has been recognized by UNESCO, to be honest, and we are in close collaboration. I visited 2 years ago, I think it is now, the committee of the second protocol, and we agreed in writing that the committee is going to take into account cultural rights in their work, which means that the convention incorporates cultural rights. However, contrary to what was it France, I think, in the morning, that said that, you know, we value cultural identity and we value multilateralism. I think it is essential that we move from words to actions, and their specific actions. Going somewhere and talking, or having somebody talking in the UN about the important protection that UNESCO gives, and it gives important protection, is great, but we need to move to action. And as an independent expert, I can tell you that I see a lot of talk, and I'd like to see a little bit more of action. So what would that ensure? This would ensure that the instrument evolves, and all international law instruments evolve, and the instruments remain living frameworks that continue to be relevant and continue to address the needs that exist at each time in society.
Thank you very much, Alexandra, for this plea. I think it is well listened to, and probably we will have later on discussions at UNESCO in particular. I was present for the preparation of the second protocol, but the main aspect at that time was the fact that UNESCO was not able to intervene in crisis and conflict which are under internal problems, internal groups fighting, because the convention was done as a condition, war between countries, because those who drafted the Convention of '54 are coming directly from the Second World War. Ambassador Abdul Karim Hashim, as an ambassador, but also as a lawyer, what is your opinion about this question?
Thank you so much, Munir, to give me this new job. No, really, I echo what has been said by my colleagues, Munir and Xantia, welcoming everybody here. And as we are reflecting on a very in-time issue, the cultural heritage from crisis to peace. So to keep on reflecting on the same subject, the necessity of the conventions and international treaties, especially the Convention of UNESCO 1945 and the second protocol. So as we know that those conventions was the daughter of Second World War. It was very necessary at that time. And the nature of the Second World War, as well as the First World War, the nature of war in general at that time was quite different that we are facing actually as a conflict, especially in our region. The belligerents at that time was mainly states. War was interstates. Unfortunately, now we have a multiplicity of belligerents and actors. states, non-state actors, civil war, as well as other source of conflict. So at that time, those conventions and treaties was highly effective, really necessary, but as the whole multilateral ecosystem, everything is need to be updated, if I can say. So with the multiplicity of the factors, there is a huge need to update our convention, our legal framework in order to be more reactive, promptly reactive, without this huge structure, etatic structure, legal structure. As a representative of Iraq, I can witness the efficiency of foundation of NGOs and their prompt and swift reaction vis-à-vis the threat facing to the cultural heritage due to what I called the new model of war implicating more than state, non-state actor, civil war, terrorist organization. Unfortunately, what happened in the last decade in our region, especially in Iraq, we were facing more terrorist organization, non-state actor, and cultural heritage in Iraq was victim of damages caused by those actors. So an adequate answer need an adequate legal infrastructure, an adequate and updated structure to facing these recent and new challenges. I thank you.
Thank you, Excellency. Elizabeth, I think you are also having a point of view about this first question concerning the link between normative text of UNESCO, but also what should be done to complement what is said first by Alessandra on the cultural right and also by Ambassador of Iraq. And I completely support what he said because I went to Iraq during all the crisis, when it was under embargo, when it was the end of Saddam Hussein, the looting of the Iraqi National Museum, the destruction of sites, even in Mosul, not only in Baghdad. And so, or in Basra, we saw a library totally burnt in Basra, the University of Basra completely devastated, and even the plugs were taken from the rooms. So, to you, dear Elizabeth, what is your opinion about this question?
Thank you very much. I will use my cultural right to speak in English, in French. So,
On comprend le français.
Donc je vais parler français. C'est un défi toujours d'avoir un panel juste après le repas parce que les paupières sont lourdes. Donc je vais essayer de répondre à votre question. Peut-être juste clarifier que j'ai passé 20 ans de ma vie à négocier avec des groupes armés, des chefs rebelles dans le monde entier et que c'est habité par cette expérience que je vais répondre à vos questions aujourd'hui. Alors, la Convention de la Haye, elle contient des normes qui sont très intéressantes. Elle est perfectible, bien sûr, comme toutes les conventions, en fonction aussi de l'évolution du temps et des circonstances. Elle a un article sur lequel j'aimerais insister qui est... alors d'abord, le premier problème des conventions en général, pas seulement de celle de la Haye, c'est qu'aujourd'hui, elles sont de plus en plus l'objet de violations et qu'il n'y a pas de sanctions, il y a juste des déclarations, qu'on condamne ce qui s'est passé. Donc c'est le problème des conventions, ce n'est pas la qualité de ce qu'elles contiennent, c'est le non-respect de nombreuses conventions aujourd'hui. Il y a dans la Convention de la Haye un article 19 qui dit que l'UNESCO peut offrir ses services à toutes les parties au conflit. Et donc, quand on dit toutes les parties au conflit, si c'est un conflit interétatique, c'est entre les deux États concernés, mais si c'est un conflit à caractère non international, eh bien, ça veut dire que l'UNESCO a le droit aussi d'entrer en contact et d'offrir ses services à des groupes armés, à des acteurs armés non étatiques. Et c'est là qu'on a rencontré beaucoup de difficultés. Je vous donnerai un exemple parce qu'il illustre voilà, ce que je dis. On était en contact avec un groupe armé qui opérait près de la frontière de son pays et qui était listé terroriste et qui avait saisi, arrêté beaucoup de trafiquants, alors bien sûr avec des cigarettes et de l'alcool, mais aussi avec des objets d'art. Et ils ont collecté tous ces objets d'art et ils ont demandé à l'UNESCO comment les rendre, parce que bien sûr, eux ne pouvaient pas les rendre à leur gouvernement puisqu'ils étaient en guerre contre leur gouvernement. Et l'UNESCO n'a pas répondu. On s'est offert comme intermédiaire. Ça n'a toujours pas été le cas, malgré le très fort soutien d'Irina Bokova à ce moment-là. Je me souviens, elle était très en faveur de travailler avec une organisation comme la nôtre. Mais la pression politique de très nombreux États était trop forte et empêchait l'UNESCO, voire d'autres agences onusiennes, de travailler avec des groupes armés. Et un second exemple, c'était aussi un groupe armé qui voulait être formé sur la valeur des objets qu'il pouvait saisir, savoir si c'était des faux, si c'était des vrais. Et là aussi, voilà, on n'a pas pu obtenir le soutien de l'UNESCO. Encore une fois, ce n'est pas l'UNESCO qui est à blâmer, c'est le système politique qui aujourd'hui dit « Ah, on ne parle pas à des terroristes » et voilà, ceux qui soutiennent ce genre de travail. Et c'est là que je pense qu'il doit y avoir un progrès et ça va dans le sens de ce que vous venez de dire, c'est qu'on doit travailler dans de nouveaux contextes. Maintenant, sur les droits culturels, je trouve important que Madame ait insisté sur ces droits culturels. On a pu voir que de nombreux groupes, quand une population ne peut pas parler sa langue, a ces livres d'histoire qui sont interdits, ne peut pas pratiquer ses cérémonies ancestrales religieuses et danser leurs danses, eh bien c'est là que des révoltes naissent et c'est comme ça que naissent des conflits internes, des guerres. Pour finir, on voit avec les minorités ethniques de Birmanie et autres. Donc c'est le non-respect des droits de l'homme en général, mais aussi des droits culturels qui créent des conflits. Et donc, respecter ces droits civils, ces droits culturels, c'est essentiel pour une paix stable et durable.
Merci beaucoup, Elisabeth, pour ce témoignage. C'est vrai que nous avons été soumis, moi j'ai travaillé pendant 25 ans à l'UNESCO, on a été soumis par exemple lorsque les objets sont sortis d'Afghanistan et qu'il y avait un collectionneur suisse, M. Bucherer, nous avons eu du mal à trouver le lien entre ce qu'il voulait faire. Il a créé à Bubendorf, à côté de Bâle, un endroit où il a acheté et déposé les objets. Il a fallu que l'on travaille avec le Parlement suisse pour que le Parlement suisse nous garantisse que les objets retourneront à leur pays d'origine. J'ai eu le même problème avec les talibans, parce que nous ne pouvions pas parler aux talibans. Donc on a essayé d'envoyer un envoyé spécial qui n'était pas de l'UNESCO, mais qui était un ambassadeur, l'ambassadeur de France, Pierre Lafrance, d'ailleurs très connu. C'est vrai que pour l'UNESCO, et je parle sous la direction de mon amie et notre directrice générale Irina, nous n'avons pas toujours, sur le plan juridique, les moyens de parler à des groupes qui ne sont pas reconnus sur le plan étatique. Madame Corinne Montmalvagnan, je pense que vous avez aussi quelque chose à dire en tant que directrice exécutive de la fondation de Kofi Annan. Non, sur le... Micro, s'il vous plaît.
Je n'ai pas vraiment besoin de micro parce que je n'ai pas grand-chose à ajouter à ce qui a été dit, très franchement, sur ces questions juridiques, du cadre juridique et sur les droits culturels. Je me joins à tout ce qui a été dit jusqu'à présent. Nous n'avons pas travaillé depuis très longtemps sur les questions d'héritage culturel. Je pourrais vous dire tout à l'heure un petit peu ce que nous faisons maintenant en partenariat avec ALIF. Nous le faisons avec grand plaisir, mais c'est vraiment toujours dans l'esprit de la consolidation de la paix. Donc le thème de votre panel nous parle fortement et je serais ravie de parler plutôt sur ces questions-là que sur les questions juridiques liées au protocole dont vous avez parlé.
Très bien, je vous remercie. Est-ce que mon cher ami Louis veut dire quelque chose?
Non, je n'ai pas grand-chose à dire, mais je voudrais dire quelque chose quand même. D'abord, je parle de l'optique de notre organisation qui est sur le terrain dans des situations... I'm sorry, I'm going to speak in English, if you don't mind. Our organization that is in the field in war or post-war situations. And we've been accumulating an experience for more than 20 years in countries like Afghanistan or Syria. And then, of course, the conventions are in the background. The UN principles are in the background, but the people you meet have no idea of these conventions exist. And then, what is the reality? From time to time, you can invoke these conventions to some administrators and low-grade antiquities service civil servants, that poor guys are also overcome by the notion of UNESCO principles. But when you meet with the normal people, they say, why cultural heritage? What we need is food, water, employment, and security. And then there's what I think is a point to think about. The UN regulations, the UNESCO conventions, think about cultural heritage on a legal sense as an end in itself. But I think there is a need to look beyond. Cultural heritage is a socio-economic asset for future populations. And that's what is not in the optics as these conventions are articulated today. When we work in the cultural field in these post-war situations, cultural heritage for us is the leitmotif to create capacity, training, jobs, etc., etc. And I think this is the other dimension that for the future has to be considered on that. And then we may talk about that if you wish later on.
Absolutely. Thank you, Luis, for this comment, because we will come to it when we come to the third question. The second question to this panel is the following. What are, in your opinion, the synergy that could be identified in dealing with cultural heritage in danger in comparing the actions done in the field of humanitarian and peace building done by other institutions? The role of cultural heritage can be considered as ambiguous. It can divide or can be presented as such, as well as unite. And I mentioned Unite for Heritage that you launched so brightly, Dr. Irina, a few years ago. How, in your experience, you can consider it to be a lever for crisis, exit, processes, and peace building? Who wants to start? Alessandra.
I feel a bit like
Please.
I'm in exams with the 3 questions, but so I think that it is essential that there are synergies, and I think it is essential to work through these synergies and try to create more, because we continue to operate in silos, all of us, the UN, as well, but also even NGOs and civil society. Let me give you an example. If the focus is on humanitarian law, when the military goes to protect cultural heritage, then who's going to tell the military what is cultural heritage? Who's going to, and this is real people, like, it was said real people, although I consider myself very real, but, who's going to tell what is cultural heritage? Who's going to tell them that cultural heritage is not only what the state says? Who's going to tell them that, cultural heritage evolves, and maybe what they thought that cultural heritage was 20 years ago is not cultural heritage anymore? Who's going to tell them that it's not only about buildings, it is also about customs and about traditions? It's about living heritage now. Who's going to tell them that, everybody has to participate? Not only the scientists from the UK and France and Germany, not only the architects in the country where they're going, but also the person and the woman who is in her house and does not come out, because this is, also the living culture. Who's going to tell them what happens when this living culture is in conflict with the participation? All these things are done by, all these directions are given by international human rights law. So the soldier that only knows humanitarian law is not going to protect the cultural heritage. What he's going to do is he's going to destroy the right to cultural heritage and cultural rights in their well-meaning attempt to actually protect cultural heritage. So this is why synergies are really important. And for this reason, you know, this is how culture can lead, and the protection of cultural heritage can lead to dehumanization, or can lead to a multicultural society, a cohesive multicultural society after the end of tension, or even the end of tensions. My mandate has talked a lot about dehumanization and what is happening in Gaza, and how Palestinians were portrayed, you know, at the beginning, after the horrible event that happened on the horrible violation of cultural rights and right of life and other so many rights that happened on the 8th of October. But it was about dehumanization. And, you know, powerful states and powerful human rights actors, you know, got on the car of dehumanizing a whole culture, the Palestinian culture at the beginning, in their attempt to protect, as they thought, you know, human rights. So we have to make sure that we know our human rights in practice, and our cultural rights approach in practice and in a pragmatic way, not in a theoretical way, so that we can prevent violations of human rights in the name of this, of protecting cultural heritage. And what is also important is we need to know that when we protect cultural heritage, we should look at the marginalized, at the vulnerable, not the majority, not the elite who can come to ALIF, to my office in the UN, to you know, the Red Cross, and can claim and can put forward their claims in a way that we understand them. Minority cultures are being threatened by the use of fantastic, talented people who work in AI and humanitarian law, by the soldiers that have been trained in humanitarian law but not in cultural rights and understanding minority rights. So, you know, their rights are, as we speak, being violated. So that's why I emphasize how important it is that these synergies move on from the nice words that I am saying to you now to specific action. States love cultural rights, but then the cultural rights unit at the United Nations has zero budget, has 1.5 people that work together on other mandates, and I am pro bono, I don't get paid, so I have my job every day that is going to pay for my mortgage. I've been going around for 4 years trying to convince the states that adore the protection of cultural heritage to come up with one leaflet that says what is cultural rights. Yet all these states could not spare £5,000 to do that. So that's why I'm saying, let's move from words to action.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think, yeah. I'd like to build a little bit on this, and I suspect that the reluctance of state to put it in a leaflet is also not only a budgetary one, but they're just afraid of being incapable of agreeing on certain words. And Munir, you said at the start, cultural heritage can divide or it can unite, and I really want to agree with this. I mean, as far back as 2005, you'll remember that Kofi Annan set up the Alliance of Civilizations precisely for this, in a context where cultural heritage was seen as dividing people, not uniting them. So he tried very early on to make sure that this was not the case. But now I think what we see really in the last 10 years in increased weaponization of cultural heritage, increased stress on national identities that are exclusive, that are not inclusive. And this, of course, is a big threat to peace inside nations and among nations. So moving to concrete action and away from words, Kofi Annan never believed that a peace treaty is something that is signed in New York and ignored on the ground. I mean, peace is obviously built by the communities on the ground, especially by young people who are often set aside and forgotten, and who are very, it's funny because young people tend to be very strong in defending their cultural identity and their cultural rights, but they often have no idea what they are. And especially they have very little knowledge of their own heritage sites. So I think in moving to action on the ground, and this is where also what Louis was saying about the, providing work on the ground that is going to provide job opportunities for people in post-conflict setting, where we know that job opportunities are very few for young people, where we're going to bring communities, divided communities, around a shared project of restoration of something that belongs to all of them. I think this is really the kind of work that Alif does on the ground, and that is extremely important in moving from words to action on the ground. And we're very, very happy to start a project now doing this in the citadel of Tripoli, where we're bringing young people, and it's quite an innovative project, where we're bringing young people and teaching them with specialists, obviously, and with the Lebanese authorities, teaching them from different communities in Tripoli, which is a very diversity, to work together on the restoration of this citadel, which is their shared heritage, and around this build a notion of social cohesion and tolerance. So this is a bit of an experiment, but we think it's going to be successful.
Thank you. I'm really happy to see that we are going from, discussions at the level of, ideology or level of text, official documents, to actions. And it's good that we are now getting directly to action in the field, inclusive, as you said. Using the Convention of 1972, but also the Convention of 2003, we have an international convention which is signed today, I think, by more 170 countries about the intangible, which means the life of the people, which is the living heritage of the people. Ambassador, maybe you can give us an example in Mosul, where I'm going every 6 months to Mosul. So I have seen how the young people have created an NGO after 3 years of Daesh, who destroyed all the city, everything, the church, the mosque, the synagogue, the houses, everything was destroyed. You have now a young generation of Mosuliot, we call them Mosuliot. They created an NGO, and they are working in Mosul. Ambassador, you are from Iraq. So
oui, merci beaucoup. Moi aussi, je vais exercer mon droit à parler en français.
Ah oui, pourquoi pas.
Collègue.
This is the diversity.
Oui. Non, mais c'est vrai ce que vous dites. Préserver l'héritage culturel, c'est pas une notion abstraite. Je peux dire que ça se concrétise à travers nos expériences en Irak. Ceux qui se disent aujourd'hui en Irak et ailleurs majoritaires, numériquement majoritaires, ethniquement, religieusement, etc., et se donnent le droit de se dire avoir le pouvoir et avoir leur héritage culturel en tant que majorité dominante, et écraser, si on peut dire, l'héritage culturel des autres. Donc concrètement parlant, l'exemple de l'Irak est très parlant, étant donné que l'Irak est un pays multi-ethnique, multi-religieux. Depuis Somar, Akkad, Ashur, Babylone, les Sassanides, religieusement parlant, la naissance de l'Ancien Testament, de Talmud, a été fait à Babylone, en Irak. Ensuite, jusqu'à maintenant, nous avons des villages qui parlent aramien, la langue parlée par Jésus-Christ. Et ensuite, l'islam. Et au nom de quoi une organisation telle que Daesh et autres se donne le droit de se dire on est majoritaire. Donc, préserver l'héritage culturel, c'est concret, c'est bâtir la paix ou le paix, je ne sais pas. Donc, préserver cet héritage culturel et montrer aux gens que ceux que se disent majoritaires et se donnent tous les droits aujourd'hui, ils étaient peut-être dans quelque temps avant minoritaires ou ils n'existaient pas. Et ceux qui sont aujourd'hui majoritaires, demain ou après-demain, ils vont devenir, je ne sais quoi, minoritaires ou quoi. Donc, c'est pour ça que je préfère toujours parler des composants, les composants d'une société, quel que soit leur nombre numériquement parlant, c'est des composants. Et en préservant, et pendant les périodes de conflit, l'héritage culturel, il fait partie des dégâts oubliés. On parle moins de dégâts culturels que des autres dégâts. Ils sont très importants, mais la restauration de cet héritage culturel ouvre cette dimension de multicité, de multicomposants, et ça aide beaucoup et ça établit une notion de tolérance, ce qui est très important pour avoir une paix durable. Je vais m'arrêter là. Merci.
Alors, on va passer vraiment à la question 3 qui est What are, according to your knowledge and experience, some concrete actions? Vous voulez parler sur ce... Allez-y, allez-y.
Si j'ose.
Oui, bien sûr. Mais comme le temps passe...
Je vais faire très vite. Alors, la question de comparer, vous aviez dit comparer les acteurs humanitaires, les acteurs de paix et les acteurs de... Oui. Voilà, je pense qu'on ne doit pas les comparer, on ne doit pas les opposer. Je pense, et j'aime parler de complémentarité, même pas plus que de la synergie ou de la collaboration, c'est de la complémentarité. Je peux faire en tant qu'ONG des choses qu'un État ne peut pas faire. Je peux être en contact avec un groupe armé listé terroriste alors qu'un État ou une agence onusienne ne peut pas le faire. L'État risque des problèmes politiques avec d'autres États. Moi, au pire, voilà, je ne suis pas aimée par cet État, voire j'ai un mandat d'arrêt, mais c'est égal, je vais aller en vacances dans un autre pays. Donc, je pense qu'il faut parler... Chacun est une pièce d'un puzzle et doit jouer sa pièce pour que ce puzzle, c'est-à-dire la paix, soit complète. Et puis, on ne peut pas parler, je pense, d'héritage culturel, de protection de l'héritage culturel. On ne peut pas dissocier de la protection des peuples, de la population. C'est un tout, la protection de l'héritage culturel, du patrimoine culturel et la protection des peuples, ça forme un tout. Et je trouve intéressant de voir qu'à l'UNESCO, on parle de patrimoine mondial de l'humanité. On aurait pu parler de patrimoine mondial de sites à protéger, patrimoine mondial de monuments à conserver, mais non, on a parlé dès le début de patrimoine mondial de l'humanité. C'est bien que ça fait ces droits culturels, ce patrimoine culturel fait partie de l'humanité.
Merci beaucoup de cette contribution. Nous n'avons pas beaucoup de temps, donc je passe rapidement à la troisième question, mais qui est une question très importante parce qu'on va parler d'actions concrètes. What are, according to your knowledge and experience, some concrete actions that could be suggested for assisting countries and populations in danger? How be the possible transition structure from crisis management to sustainable development in order to support viable peace? Luis, je commence par toi. I start with you, my dear friend.
My lawyer is not present to answer that question because this is a question of so many dimensions. So perhaps we should touch only a few ones. The first one, and I think Alif is addressing, has already accumulated experience in addressing some of the elements of that question. So I feel also in that respect very ill-equipped to take the role of Valérie Freland in answering this question. But there are questions, multiple questions. One is the question of how you develop an infrastructure in war or post-war countries that could take care of the protection of the cultural heritage with this view of its potential socio-economic value. And this certainly, in these conditions, is civil society who is more prepared in a chaos situation, is the communities which are better prepared to, on the field, to take the immediate crisis measures to protect cultural heritage. And among communities, the professionals of cultural heritage. And I think one of the first priorities will be to discuss in the international fora how cells of well-prepared people in countries prone to this type of conflicts could be trained and prepared, as you have in other realms of emergency. We will need to be necessary also in a practical thinking to see what could be, and I think you mentioned that about how you train the army, the police forces, the customs. There is a tremendous need to create packages of training for these elements of every state. The problem is that when you go into the type of conflicts that we know, non-state forces, perhaps these structures will themselves disappear. So it's a matter of preparedness. Then there is the a posteriori. Once you end the conflict and you enter into the process of reconstruction, what can be done? But of course, this is a very complex. I don't want to spend many time on that. And I'm sure my colleagues here have some ideas of how to come from crisis to reconstruction and what are the measures that could be taken there and what are the structures that should be prioritary.
Thank you, Luis. This morning, we had a very good presentation by General Haidar from Lebanon. And he exactly replied to this question of how to do after the crisis and how the army in particular, because it's already a structure in the country, can reply to the needs and to the emergency. Madam, I see you take the microphone. Please go ahead.
I just have a hesitation because you can't really oppose crisis and peace anymore. The fact is that crises tend to maybe decrease a little bit, and then you open a space for peace building, and peace building is actually the prevention of the next crisis. So I don't think it's so clean cut. And I completely agree with what Elisabeth said before. We no longer have humanitarians working in a crisis and then development and peace specialists coming afterwards. It's just a continuum, and we have them all. And maybe what is missing still is this notion that the restoration and protection of cultural heritage is an integral part of peace building from the very first days, when there is a space that opens. And the crisis is probably not finished. But as soon as the space opens a little bit, then we must focus immediately on cultural heritage. And I don't think that's necessarily we're there yet.
Thank you. Alessandra, not too long, please, because we need others to speak and also the room to ask questions.
So 2 issues. First of all, training materials, guidance have to be infused by human rights standards. United Nations treaty bodies have to be infused by UNESCO, civil society, and humanitarian organizations questions when it comes to monitoring state reports. But there should be no training handbooks of the Red Cross that do not refer to human rights standards when they talk about protecting cultural heritage, first. And secondly, participation. We should all agree that we need to go back and look what exactly participation means and ensure that there is participation of all in deciding anything to do with cultural heritage in times of peace and times of war. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Très brièvement, sur les actions à mener, je pense que d'abord, je répète ce que j'ai dit avant, négocier avec tout le monde, ne pas exclure les so-called terroristes parce qu'ils ne deviendront pas moins terroristes parce qu'on ne leur parle pas. Ils sont partie du problème, ils seront partie de la solution. La deuxième action importante, c'est apprendre aux gens, aux acteurs qui travaillent dans la protection de l'héritage culturel, l'humanitaire et le peace building, de travailler ensemble. Ils sont trop souvent en silo et on considère trop souvent la protection de l'héritage culturel comme quelque chose de secondaire qui vient après l'urgence humanitaire. Ça doit être vraiment inclus. Et je dirais même, dans un processus de paix, ça devrait être en premier parce que c'est un sujet parfois très souvent moins sensible que des sujets politiques de partage de pouvoir, de territoire, ce qu'il faut mettre dans un accord de paix. Donc ça peut être un entry point et je pense que c'est important. Et je donne très brièvement un exemple comme la culture peut être un sujet de pardon. C'était un groupe armé qui visait un convoi militaire et il y a eu une erreur dans l'opération militaire et c'est une voiture avec 4 civils qui a été touchée, avec 4 civils qui sont morts. Alors le groupe armé a jugé ces combattants qui avaient fait cette erreur et après ils ont proposé à la communauté concernée qui avait perdu de faire un acte pour eux. Alors ils ne leur ont pas donné de l'argent pour se racheter ni une nouvelle voiture. Ils ont construit un monument au milieu de la place de leur village pour montrer à quel point ils s'excusaient. Ils ont utilisé la culture comme acte de pardon et je trouve ça intéressant. Et puis dernier point sur les actions, formation. À la société civile, on en a beaucoup parlé, comme ils peuvent être un pont entre les acteurs locaux, les acteurs armés non étatiques et la communauté internationale, et former les groupes armés parce qu'ils ne peuvent pas respecter des normes qu'ils ne connaissent pas. Sur la centaine de groupes armés que j'ai rencontrés, aucun ne connaissait le Blue Shield. Donc formation.
Merci Elisabeth pour cet exemple qui n'est pas très connu finalement de comment traiter aussi avec ceux qui sont de l'autre côté et qui sont contre le reste. Monsieur l'ambassadeur, excellent.
Merci beaucoup. Juste 2 mots sur l'importance de l'implication de facteurs locaux dans reconstruire et préserver l'héritage culturel. À travers l'exemple de Alif, par exemple, en Irak, des sites culturels ravagés appartiennent à tout le monde, bien qu'ils soient dédiés à une religion ou à une civilisation antique, mais après tout, ils appartiennent à tout le monde localement. L'importance d'impliquer le facteur local dans les reconstructions de ces sites culturels, ce n'est pas uniquement donner du travail ou donner une expertise aux acteurs locaux, mais créer des liens communautaires. Vous avez un musulman qui travaille pour reconstruire une église ou un monastère, un chrétien qui travaille avec un musulman et avec un juif pour reconstruire un site antique, sémérien, achurien, etc. Au-delà de transmettre une expérience, une expertise et impliquer les acteurs locaux, c'est créer des liens communautaires qui sont très importants pour bâtir une paix durable. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, ambassadeur. Je crois que c'est une bonne conclusion. C'est un thème, évidemment, qui mérite beaucoup de discussions, mais on a ouvert des pistes, toutes, mesdames et messieurs, vous avez ouvert des pistes qui vont nous amener, aussi bien au niveau de l'UNESCO qu'au niveau d'Alif, de continuer à travailler sur cette notion de l'implication des communautés locales. Moi, je travaille depuis 30 ans au Cambodge et je trouve que c'est un exemple merveilleux. La ville de Siem Reap, qui est à côté du site d'Angkor, c'était un village quand je suis allé en 92. Aujourd'hui, c'est une ville. Le développement qui a eu lieu a été fait grâce à un comité créé par l'UNESCO qui s'appelle le Comité international pour la sauvegarde et le développement du site d'Angkor. On a lié patrimoine et développement. Et on a travaillé, figurez-vous, avec les bonzes. Parce que ces temples sont vivants. Il y a les bouddhistes qui viennent, etc. Et nous avons fait une association avec les bonzes de façon à ce que les opérations de sauvegarde ne se fassent pas simplement pour les pierres, mais pour la population. Je ne voulais pas en dire plus. On me fait signe que le temps est en train de passer. Je passe maintenant la parole à la salle. Question, allez-y. Je vois une personne ici, vous lui donnez le micro. Vous présentez, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the very great presentation from the panelists. My name is Said Khalili. I'm from Afghanistan. I represent here the HPEX network, which is a network of Afghanistan cultural heritage experts in exile. You're very well aware of the situation of Afghanistan, and particularly the women and girls in Afghanistan, that they are denied of all their basic human rights, including cultural rights, of course. They're banned from going to school, they're banned from working, even from going to the park, practicing their normal cultural activities. So taking into consideration that situation, of course, one of the questions is how we can support those communities, particularly the women and girls in Afghanistan, to defend their human rights and cultural rights. My dear friend Mr. Bushnaki mentioned that it's hard to talk with Taliban, but our colleagues say that if we can stop, if it's hard, we cannot stop to talk to terrorists. If there is a problem that we need to find a way, if we need to find a solution. So I hope that you and your team will continue to find a way to talk to them and to find a solution for the preservation of the cultural heritage and particularly the cultural rights of the women in Afghanistan. But my second question is about the people who fled the country, who are now living in different countries, in European countries and other Western countries as refugees. Maybe I don't know, or I do not have that much information. I wanted to know, is there any piece of legal documents that addresses particularly the protection of refugees' cultural heritage in the hosting countries? Because those refugees who fled the country, they're in a new country where they are not familiar with the lifestyle, with the culture, with everything. So, and they are banned from practicing their cultural activities in their home countries, and they need those cultural values and cultural heritage needs to be protected. Of course, they are recognized as refugees, but is there any legal protection for the cultural heritage of those refugees? Thank you.
Who wants to reply to these questions from our colleague from Afghanistan, Alessandra?
Sometimes the questions from the public do not have an answer, but only partial answers. I can perhaps talk a bit about Afghanistan, not pretending to give an answer at all. Obviously, the question in Afghanistan is human rights in general and in particular in some areas. But I can tell you that there is no problem of cultural heritage. And this I can give you an answer for that. Valérie and Alif knows very well that the current regime, which their predecessors blew up the Bamiyan Buddhas, now, 2 years ago, asked us jointly, Alif and the Aga Khan Trust for Culture, to preserve a Buddhist site, something that we are doing. So I think we are over the problem, and you were talking about is divisive or not divisive. I said the question was wrongly placed. It's not that cultural heritage is divisive or not divisive. It's the interpretation of cultural heritage by sectarian ideological parties that makes it divisive. But today, the question of cultural heritage, the plurality of cultural heritage, the recognition of a millenary history with different cultures and religions in Afghanistan, this is over for that regime. They've matured, if one can say. I can tell you also that the protection of cultural heritage, illicit traffic of cultural heritage in Afghanistan has improved a lot since the Taliban regime took over. It was the illicit export of materials was enormous in the previous period. Now it has really been constrained in a significant manner. So I can stop there. The rest of your question is far above my intellectual capacities.
Okay, no, we know that. Thank you, Luis, and we not have a lot of time. I see you. Last question, unfortunately.
Thank you so much for a brilliant panel. Peter Larson, University of Geneva. What strikes me that we hear about different forms of valorization. We hear about weaponization, cultural rights, engagement with other actors, local actors in a changing scene. Could we think about also shifting from cultural heritage in singular to cultural heritages and think of it in plural terms and how to deal with that diversity? I'm saying that because it's as if we assume that we start with something shared that is then somehow disrupted by crisis, and then we have to recuperate it, where in fact, of course, it's a source of often very conflicting perspectives. And indeed, if we want to move towards this, peace building and so on, we need to take that diversity and the rights concerns and inequalities at stake. So I would like to hear if you have thoughts about how we can move in that direction of more diversity, more inclusion in addressing heritages and not just heritage. Thank you.
So, who wants to address this question? No one?
Just maybe to recognize...
Very shortly, because we cannot enter into detail.
Thank you. Thank you. I think it's not even a question. I think it's a statement. And thank you. And the answer is you need to be super inclusive in your peace-building activities so that you make sure that all the perspectives, you don't recreate the problems that started the conflict, right? That all the communities are included in your reconstruction, including in reconstruction of but you're right. You're absolutely right. And from now on, I'm going to talk about cultural heritages.
Thank you. No, I have very quickly one response. I worked in Mostar when there were 2 mayors, and then because of cultural heritage and the agreement by the communities, which were all destroyed, the Croat, the Serbs, the Bosnian, the bridge, and I remember Irina was going to make a very important speech about the role of the bridge in combining the will and la convivialité, la vie en commun des 3 communautés. Last question from our colleague from Niger.
Merci beaucoup à tous les exposants. Moi, je voulais juste intervenir par rapport à la déphasage de la crise à la paix, cet instant de pansement. En fait, il faut qu'on parle des pansements. Pour trouver la paix, il faut avoir des pansements pour ce qui a été déjà fait, de la construction et de la réhabilitation, parce que c'est important de récupérer l'histoire perdue. C'est important de récupérer les messages perdus. C'est important de récupérer les messages qu'on est en train de vouloir escamoter, de vouloir disparaître, parce que c'est cela qu'il s'agit. Une justice sociale. C'est très important souvent de parler dans les conventions de cet aspect-là qui nécessite une importance, parce que la contribution des communautés locales, vous n'êtes pas sans savoir que dans certains endroits où il y a beaucoup de conflits ethniques et religieux, cette mosaïque à l'interne est très nécessaire pour la paix. Par exemple, entre les cousinages, surtout en Afrique, on parle de cousinage entre telle ethnie, mettre en avant beaucoup des aspects comme ça sont des régulateurs pour la paix durable. C'est ce que nous souhaitons aujourd'hui dans des pays. Et comment éviter des transports de certains problèmes qu'on voit aussi en Asie, qui se transforment aussi en Afrique, vraiment avec tous ces phénomènes-là, contrecarrer tous ces liens-là, et comment, c'est cela ma question, pour éviter de se retrouver dans les mêmes dilemmes. Merci.
Je vous remercie, bravo, thank you for pour la sagesse africaine traditionnelle qui répond à notre professeur à Genève. Alors je voudrais remercier les panélistes. I want to thank you very much. It was a very difficult questions because they are really in the core of the actions of all the NGOs, all the official organizations from the top, UN, to the regional or local offices dealing with cultural heritage. Thank you so much for your interventions, but they are really replying to the question that Valérie wanted to have replies and also openings for the future. Thank you so much.